Hi there. Today's question in the Research Like a Pro question and answer series is how do you write a DNA proof summary? And I'm going to talk about this question by showing an example from my own research about my father's family where I confirmed several generations of my patrilineal line. And I will show you a simple proof summary that correlates documentary evidence with DNA evidence, which is a good way to practice using DNA evidence. For our theme this month, I'm going to talk a little bit about proof summaries. And this is one part of the lesson that we discuss in lesson 11. And it's kind of fun because in the DNA course in office hours, we're able to feature all 12 of the lessons in one year. So I love how November is lesson 11 and December is lesson 12. It's just fits so nice and neat into the year. Well, in lesson 11, we talk about proof statements, proof summaries, proof arguments. We talk about copyright, finishing the report, privacy, and publication. Kind of all the things that you think about after you've finished a phase of research. Maybe you've finished 2 phases of research, and maybe you want to write up a proof argument or create a lineage that shows proof of yourself back to your third great grandparents, something like that. And so I thought I would focus in on proof summaries. What is a proof summary? Let's go over kind of the definition of a proof summary and kind of what they look like, and then I'm going to show you an example. So a proof summary is usually a bulleted list of evidence or a paragraph or two listing the evidence. It's a documented summary, so there will be footnotes with documentation from your sources. Sometimes there might be a minor conflict that you need to explain, but usually there won't be anything big that is challenging, like multiple different candidates for a parent and you have to eliminate one. That would be a proof argument. But a proof summary might have a small piece of conflicting evidence, or you might have multiple pieces of evidence that need to be correlated, such as correlating documentary and DNA evidence. So putting those together would require a proof summary. Usually you can't include DNA evidence in a proof statement. It's just not enough space to put everything in one, unless it's a parent-child relationship. And you could probably document that one sentence with one DNA match between a parent and a child, and then another piece of like documentary evidence showing the people's ages. So if you're adding DNA into a proof, it's either going to be a proof summary or a proof argument, unless it was that parent-child example I just said. So it's longer than a proof statement and shorter than a proof argument. Proof arguments are more complicated and are multiple pages long. But if you have uncomplicated DNA evidence, you can incorporate it into a proof summary. Why would you want to create a proof summary? This can be shared in a family tree for parent-child relationships. And often we see parent-child relationships in family trees with no evidence whatsoever, or scant evidence, or one piece of evidence from a source that doesn't have direct information, direct evidence, or maybe it has secondary information. And so it's not very strong. And so we can really beef up our family trees that we're sharing by adding proof summaries to them like this. And often you'll see in a family tree that someone has given it a tag of DNA ancestor or an image that says proven DNA relationship. And as someone viewing the tree, that's all you really get is that that user has decided that this is proven through the DNA matches that they've seen, but they don't usually share the evidence. So as genealogists, we want to know why it's proven, and a proof summary like what I'm about to show you can be a really good way to beef up our family trees, especially when the parent-child relationships maybe aren't as obvious. Um, Sometimes if you are writing a larger work, like a narrative lineage or a narrative family history, a pedigree, a narrative genealogy, some kind of book or article like that that includes many generations and you want to show evidence linking the families over time, then you can incorporate DNA evidence into that. And within each generation, you might have a proof summary for each parent-child relationship that incorporates some DNA matches. So the excerpts that I'll show you today might be one page out of a larger narrative showing proof amongst several generations. So what type of DNA evidence would you include in a proof summary? I mentioned in the last slide that it would be uncomplicated. DNA evidence. So that would usually mean closer matches and higher matches, ones that don't have challenges like multiple relationships or endogamy or sharing on multiple lines like that. So maybe you would have just one or two simple first cousin matches to help confirm the test taker's grandparents, or even for great grandparents, you could use 2, 3, 4, somewhere in that range, that number of second cousin matches. And if they're, just strong second cousin matches, you might only need 2. If they're like second cousin once removed or 2 times removed, you might need 4 of them, depending on what you have. And then if you have like a Y DNA match with a third cousin to confirm second great grandparents, then you could probably use that. So these are just examples of uncomplicated DNA evidence that you could use in a proof summary that wouldn't require multiple pages of charts and diagrams and all kinds of things like that. So here's the example of a proof argument that incorporates DNA evidence. So this could be just one page out of a multiple page lineage. This comes from my 3-generation report that I made for showing linkage from my father back to his second great grandparents and following his patrilineal line, but using autosomal DNA. And I could have used Y DNA because he does have Y DNA matches, but not until further back in his line. So to prove him to his second great grandparents, I have to use autosomal DNA. So in this example proof argument, you can see that half the page is narrative, the other half is documentation. And so I'll zoom in on the next slide and show you more. But in order to include 2 DNA matches like I did, I needed to show how these DNA matches line goes back to the common ancestor, which is the grandparent of the test taker. So that's why this space was needed down here. So much space was taken up with the documentation. So let's zoom in on the top part, the narrative, and we'll go over how this proof summary is working. So this is a proof summary that Daniel O'Connell Elder was the father of Charles Rudolph Charlie Elder. So we have 3 bullet points here giving documentary evidence. First, a delayed birth certificate showing Charles Rudolph Elder's father as Daniel O'Connell Elder. And one footnote there that shows, and in that one footnote, we can see that it's an Idaho certificate of birth. So that one's pretty straightforward. That's direct evidence, but it is, and it does have primary information because Charlie's mother is providing the information and she would have firsthand knowledge about the father. So this is really good documentary evidence. Then we have 2 census records. I put those into one bullet point to just say that 2 census records show that Rudolph was listed as a son in Daniel's household in 2 years with consistent birth location and family members. And so I thought that could be grouped into one to save space. And then the footnote 2 has source citations to the 1900 US Census and the 1911 Canada Census. Then the third is kind of an add-on. I probably didn't need it, but it does correlate with one of the DNA matches because it's the obituary of Charlie's sister, Elsie Elder Minden. And in her obituary, she identifies her brother, Charlie Elder, and the obituary also mentions their parents' names. So I thought that was a good piece of supporting direct evidence. So there are no conflicts in the documentary evidence at all. And this third footnote goes to the obituary in the Lewiston, Idaho Morning Tribune. Then, going to the DNA evidence. For this DNA evidence bullet, I introduce it by saying 2 DNA matches to Charlie's son, Charles William Elder, confirm the relationship by sharing expected amounts for the documented relationship. I probably should fix that up. It sounds kind of funny, but confirm the relationship of Charlie to his father, Daniel. If I added that, that would help clarify it a bit. By sharing expected amounts for the documented relationship, so meaning the relationship that I found between these matches and the test taker, Charles William Elder, in the trees. And then footnote 4 goes to Blaine Bettinger's Shared Centimorgan Project, PDF. So just showing that the relationships here are showing these expected amounts here. So now I break it into 2 sub-bullets for the 2 DNA matches that confirm this relationship of Charlie to his father, Daniel. And Marcella, who is given permission for her name to be used in this report, Marcella is a DNA match to Charles William Elder, and they share 717 centimorgans. She is a granddaughter of Daniel through Daniel's daughter, Elsie. And then showing the documentation of Marcella back to Daniel, I have Marcella was the daughter of Elsie, as stated on Marcella's marriage record, and showing who she married so that we can correlate her married name here with her marriage here. And then footnote 6 goes to Marcella's marriage record. Milton Stone to Marcella Minden. And so now it would be nice to have a family tree here showing the descent of Marcella, the descent of Charles William Elder, and Shirley's daughter. But for the sake of space, I wanted to keep this all on one page and keep it simple. And the reader can figure it out from these 2 simple DNA matches. You can imagine Marcella as a granddaughter of Daniel through the daughter Elsie. So Daniel at the top, then Elsie, then Marcella. And we already know that Charles William Elder is the son of Charlie, who's the son of Daniel. So that could be another branch of the tree. And then the last DNA match here is Shirley's daughter, who is a great granddaughter of Daniel through Daniel's son, Jennings Bryan Elder. And this paragraph is slightly longer because it has to show the documentation from Shirley's daughter to Shirley. And I used Shirley's daughter as a privacy anonymization name because she didn't respond with permission, the name of this DNA match. So I just call her Shirley's daughter. So Shirley's daughter shares 527 centimorgans with Charles W. Elder. Charles and Shirley's daughter are first cousins once removed. And she listed her parents' names in her family tree. So I linked to that in footnote 7. So footnote 7 is here showing her tree. And then she appeared as a daughter in the 1950 census. So that's the next footnote. Footnote 8 is the 1950 census. And then Shirley was a daughter. So now we're going back to Shirley and linking her to her father, Jennings Bryan, with the 1930 census. And then also the 1940 census. And then the 1900 household of Daniel shows Bryan Elder. So those are the last 3 footnotes, 1930, 1940. And since I've already cited the 1900 census up here, I could do a shortened footnote below. So this shows the family of Daniel Elder, showing Rudolph here and also showing Bryan. I should change this to say Jennings Bryan Elder because that's who I was really talking about in the narrative here, Bryan Elder. So when I talked about that census up here, I was highlighting Rudolph, and so I didn't fix that up. So you can see I condensed all of the information that I would normally have in a table and in like a diagram all into one short proof summary to be able to show in basic terms that Daniel O'Connell Elder was the father of Charles Rudolph Elder. And this page could be incorporated into a larger work like a kinship determination project for certification that shows 3 generations, or into an ICAP Gen report if you're submitting to be an accredited genealogist, or if you're just wanting to create a document to share with family that shows several generations that are all linked through documentary and DNA evidence. So that's just an example of a proof summary. And so let's just review the methods that were used in this proof summary. First, we made a bulleted list rather than paragraphs, although either one would work. I presented the documentary evidence first and then the DNA evidence. There were no conflicts in the birth certificate, census, and obituary. And the DNA evidence includes those 2 matches that are listed with sub-bullets. Then each DNA match bullet includes the amount of shared DNA with the test taker and the documentation of the line back to the test taker's parents. So we had uncomplicated DNA evidence, uncomplicated documentary evidence, and we could put that together for a DNA proof summary. This is a really good thing to do to practice writing about DNA and documentary evidence because it's not complicated. It doesn't take you very long. You could sit down and do it in an afternoon, and then it gives you that practice for correlating documentary and DNA evidence. Okay, are there any comments or questions about proof summaries with DNA?
Yes, we do have a question. So if you can go back to your previous slide, and we're looking at citation 5. And the question is, people can't see your match list unless it's shared with them. So how does that prove anything? Just saying ancestry DNA match list for Charles.
Right. Yeah. So that is a challenge. And for this particular proof summary, I was just writing it for myself. But if I wanted this to be something that was published in a journal, then I would have to let the editors of the journal look at my match list and verify this. Another thing you could do if you wanted to post this on your family tree is have another person verify it and just add that to your citation and say, this has been verified by, and then put the name of the person and their email address. Then if there's anyone who doubts you, they could contact that person and say, like, did you look at that and what did you find? Or you can add screenshots. So if you wanted to add an attachment to this, like a second page, you could just put screenshots of the match between those two
Hmm.
matches. So there's a
That's a
lot
good
of things that
idea.
people could do to beef this up. And so that was a good catch. In the past, we thought, okay, we always have to just upload it to GEDmatch and then people can go verify it there. But there's a lot of different ways you can do it. So GEDmatch isn't the only option.
Right. And I was thinking this would be really good to put on Wikitree
Mm-hmm.
where we can, have a little bit of the DNA that goes along with the profiles. And it would be neat to have a proof summary there as well. So,
Right. Yeah. So that was a good point to bring up because um, Wikitree is a really great place for DNA. Okay.
yeah, just something to think about, isn't it? To put this on each of those ancestors. I would love to do that for each direct line, and especially the ones that are a little bit tricky.
Right. And I will say that I made this today from the research report that I had on this. And it was kind of fun to take the research that I already had, which was in like the format of a research report, and then put it into a different kind of genealogical writing, which is a proof summary, and kind of decide like what evidence do I really need because I had more DNA matches than this, but I tried to
Hmm.
pick the best ones. And I
Hmm.
really felt that 2 was enough for this case because they're such strong matches. I mean, they're first cousins. And so it's the
Hmm.
test taker's grandparents. So it's really not that difficult. If I was going back to another generation, I would probably want to include like 3. I think 2 could be good if you have 2 really strong second cousins, but maybe 3.
Another question: did you use AI to write this?
That's a great question. I did not, but I did ask AI. I put my report into Claude Project. I created a Claude project and I uploaded my research report and said, list the evidence for this generation. And it listed some things. And I gave it kind of what I thought it would have, like list the evidence from, I remember there's some census, like a vital record. And I told it which section to go look in and then list the DNA evidence. And what's funny is that it had a major hallucination. It grabbed a DNA match from the next generation further back and grouped it with Marcella. And obviously, I caught it because I was trying to like fix it up to write it the way I wanted to. And that's something that I've noticed that AI really struggles with is relationships from trees, like diagrams, reading the diagrams, understanding like a genealogical
Mhm.
relationship, first cousin once removed. It had a, it just like said that one of the matches was a descendant of Daniel O'Connell Elder, but it was a descendant of Daniel's father. And so it was just all wrong.
Hmm.
So we have to be
Yeah.
careful. I
Yeah.
mean, I could have just had AI write it, but it would have been wrong.
Yeah.
So
That's so interesting because with DNA, relationships are all important. I mean, with all of our genealogy, but
yeah.
especially with DNA, you've got to have the right first cousin once removed type thing.
Yeah. And another thing that it
Yeah.
did is that I told it to create footnotes in Markdown, and it brought over shortened citations. It didn't bring over the full citations from my report, which drives me crazy. So I learned in the past that you have to tell it to bring over the full citation and do not change it at all. Like, do not shorten it, don't simplify it, because it removes all the like URLs and citing layer and stuff. So I had to redo pretty much everything.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that is so interesting. You never know what you're going to get. I had AI help me with my report and I did not notice it truncating the citations. So,
Well, I think you were
yeah.
using a good prompt from Airtable, right?
I just created a Claude project and uploaded my research log and told it
Oh,
to use my research log.
yeah. So you told it to use exactly what was in that column.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it was interesting. It was
Hmm.
a good start. It kind of got me started.
Hmm.
In fact, I think it did put these censuses together like that. So I liked that.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
might have not done that myself.
I think AI is good just to get us started. Sometimes we just need that rough draft to
But I
work
had to
on.
write the whole DNA section myself
Mm,
just
good
because it
job.
was wrong.
Mm,
And it worded things wrong too. Like
yeah.
here, when it tried to do this, it said Marcella Stone, granddaughter of granddaughter of Daniel's daughter Elsie, which was wrong because she's the granddaughter of Daniel through Daniel's daughter Elsie.
Hmm.
So it
Tricky,
struggled. But it
tricky.
did give me the bones for this.
Hmm.
And that was interesting to try out. So yeah, great question. And a lot of it has to do it. Like if I redid this now, I could make my prompt better and say include the full citation. And I'm not sure how I would get it to make the DNA section correct, honestly.